Hey folks, another week, another MapPorn weekly review video. So the previous video was very interesting, a lot of fun once I really got into it. So I'm gonna do it again. So here we are again on MapPorn, and we're gonna look at the top maps for this week. Starting with, wow, okay, every single day of the American Civil War. This is gonna be a long animation, I'm guessing. So it looks like it just started. So West Virginia, so Tennessee, and yeah, the Union took New Orleans pretty early on, and their goal was to kind of split the South along the Mississippi, capture that vital route. They already got New Orleans, which was the South's biggest port and biggest city too, if I'm not mistaken. 63. So Vicksburg was the famous battle, and finally the Union got the entire Mississippi. Let's see, Gettysburg had already happened by this point, and now Virginia is collapsing as well. We got, let's see, a brief Confederate advance here. Sherman's march through Georgia, total war, and yeah, at this point, the Confederacy basically has just collapsed. Okay, wow, so this is really cool. I've seen this kind of stuff for World War II, and I've seen this type of map before, but not for the Civil War. I'm noticing now that there's also deaths in battle being tracked here, which is nice. Yeah, this is really interesting. This is one of those animations I could just keep on watching for a long time. So honestly, this is awesome. I love this. This definitely deserves to be the top of the week, without even having seen the other maps yet. So good stuff. This is the farthest point on Earth from any ocean. Okay, yeah, that's true. I guess, whatever. Well, I like it. You know, it's very simple and it's very clean. It's interesting, and this whole area in general is just so interesting. Like Tuva, the Altai Mountains, you know, Xinjiang and Aksai Chin. It's just so beautiful, honestly, and it's there's just so much going on there. I mean, Chinese culture and Islamic culture, Buddhist culture, Russian culture, kind of all combining into one. I really want to visit this area. So, you know, hopefully I will get to do that someday, but this is a good map, you know, whatever. Here we go, on to the next one. Cousin marriage rates in nations with significant Muslim populations. Now, I wish they had included other regions as well, just for context. And also, okay, one thing that I'm not sure that I totally appreciate here is they show things at sort of a subnational level, and I'm guessing that it looks like that's because of India. They have data for different states in India, but it really is misleading to show subnational boundaries for all these countries, but then color them all the same color. So, you know, if it were me designing this map, it would take a little bit of extra effort, but what I would do is I would include the states for India, but then, you know, color each, not include the boundaries for all of these countries that are supposed to be one solid color, because it could very well be that within a single country there's a lot of variation. And in fact, I imagine there is. For example, in Turkey, I'm sure there's a huge difference between you know, secular areas of Western Turkey where people are, you know, less traditionally Muslim or Islamic culture, versus, you know, some of Turkey's eastern areas. I'm sure there's a pretty big difference. Iran, I'm sure there's substantial differences as well. If you look at India, the reason why there's higher rates of cousin marriage in these southern states is simply, if I remember correctly, actually, let me look this up. I noticed in the last video I said a lot of things that turned out to be either partly wrong or fully wrong. So it looks like, okay, so it looks like by, now is this, wait a minute, is this by percentage? Okay, yeah, so Islam is more prevalent in this Ganges Valley, sort of Bengali areas, which incidentally is not where we see cousin marriage. So that's interesting. South India seems to be the place where cousin marriage is more prevalent. And I don't really have an explanation for that. Okay, a lot of people making cheap jokes. Let's see. Mandatory genetic testing and people becoming more knowledgeable. Interesting. So there is now genetic testing. I didn't know that parts of the U.S. had genetic testing as well. That's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, people. So this is an interesting fact, right? People don't kind of forget that, in modern times we think of cousin marriage as sort of, I don't know, I guess anything from sort of disgusting to immoral to improper. But, the fact is that humans for most of time have lived in communities of between 100 and 300 people. And so inevitably you would end up marrying someone who was related to you. But there's a huge difference between marrying your first cousin versus marrying your second, third, or fourth cousin. And this is another one of those things where I'm trying to make sure I actually remember correctly, but having a child with your third or fourth cousins leads to less chance of birth defects than having it with a total stranger. Couples who are far removed from each other could have genetic incompatibilities. Yeah, so believe it or not, nature has sort of actually optimized for this, or evolution, I should say, because for most of human history, we didn't really have contact with total genetic strangers. So, I don't know what this means, how they define cousin. I don't know. This is, it's interesting. So it looks like Saudi Arabia, Burkina Faso, Pakistan. I guess these are kind of well, Saudi Arabia is very modernized, but I guess culturally speaking, it's not very westernized, shall we say. Yeah, interesting stuff. Every castle in Europe. Yeah, this is another one of those things where it's like, oh wow, well, first of all, okay, I guess before I really criticize, I want to say this is a really cool map and probably it's a really cool data set, actually. I don't know how they really gathered this data. I guess there's castle enthusiasts, there's archaeologists, people who are really interested in all this stuff, architects. But it looks like there's really a lot of data here. But I will say that, again, this kind of depends on the definition of what do you consider a castle, because, the type of castle that we in like American or Western culture think of is actually very specific to, sort of the French-German type of area, because that's the type of castle that was actually useful in this type of combat scenario. In other parts, I mean, you'll notice like the UK seems to have a lot less, Spain seems to have a lot less, Eastern Europe has a lot less. Once you get out into the Eurasian plain, castles are kind of, well, I guess unnecessary and sort of impractically expensive to build, basically, because, building a large stone fortification is a huge use of resources. And the point is that in Eastern Europe, you don't really see castles just kind of in the middle of nowhere the way that you see them in France. And I don't know why that is, but I would guess that it has something to do with just the topography and the way that warfare kind of works in these areas and the population density. So, interesting stuff. And of course, with these maps, you always have to be careful with the sampling procedure. So, maybe the data source, maybe this is a collection of various data sources. You oftentimes see this where one particular country might be very well represented, but then the data gathered for the UK might have been gathered by different people with different standards or different amount of resources, so they weren't able to find as many data points. And so this map might be misleading if it gives you the impression that Spain and the UK have many fewer castles than France and Germany? I don't know. It's hard to tell without really investigating, but I don't think it's worth it right now. But that's always something to consider, especially with this type of map where it just shows like raw data points on a map. What's the scariest thing in every European country? Okay, this is kind of funny because the first thing I saw, I looked at Russia and it said the Dyatlov Pass case, which is very scary. It's a story of these people who went hiking this scientific expedition in the Ural Mountains, which would be kind of out here where this cat is. And pretty much they sort of disappeared and weren't heard from. And when they were finally found, it was they were found under very like bizarre circumstances. So there were bodies, naked bodies found sort of outside the tent. Apparently sort of people had, it looked as though people had quickly like run out of the tent, very like basically in their underwear or just naked. I think one person's tongue was missing. Anyway, oh, and there was like radiation or something found in very, so it's just like very, very strange things that didn't seem to really add up into any story that made any sort of sense. So that's the Dyatlov Pass incident. You guys should definitely read that Wikipedia article. That's a good one to check out. So anyway, that's like seriously a scary thing. And then the second thing I saw was Lukashenko, which I don't know. I mean, I guess he's scary for some people, but you know, in a different sense. Rainbow flags. Okay, I'm trying to figure out like what is the joke here, you know? Like what's the, from whose point of view? I don't know what Krampus is. Maybe I should Google it, but maybe I shouldn't. Oh yeah, Krampus is the German, yeah, that thing. Okay, that is pretty scary actually. Rejoining the EU. Some of these are funny, some of these are cheesy, some of these are not funny at all. They're just very serious. The ghost village of Kayakoi, that sounds pretty bad, pretty legit. Okay, well, anyway, and this is another one of the, this is Atlasova, one of the, like, again, I don't know who they are, but they've seemed to have popped up recently. This is actually like, of the maps that I've seen by them, this is one of the better ones, because at least it's like obviously a joke, versus the other ones that sort of pretend to be serious but just like really suck. Oh yeah, tomorrow night we'll have Aurora visible. Interesting that there's like this band, I don't know if this is true or not, but there's like this band where you can see it much farther south than normal. Or maybe it's saying that the Aurora is visible. So tomorrow night, so I guess I must have missed it. It was probably cloudy anyway. Interesting. Why does Iowa randomly have all these counties indicated? It doesn't really make any sense. The handedness of rail traffic in France. Oh, this dates back to like the mid 19th century. In Germany, I'm guessing the trains go on the right side, and this is like Alsace-Lorraine. In 1871, France lost Alsace-Lorraine to Prussia, or in the Franco-Prussian War, and eventually to Germany. And well, I'm guessing they just kind of, that sort of solidified the train infrastructure there. Population density comparison between France and Germany. This is an interesting map, and there's definitely something to be said about the differences in the character of sort of urbanization in the two countries. But it's also important to point out that this map is based on municipal boundaries, which are not determined in the same way in France as they are in Germany. In France, the municipalities are typically smaller than they are in Germany. And also in France, the municipalities tend to be formed sort of, how do I say this? They're constructed based on the urban shape of the town, versus in Germany, it's much more just purely geographical. So for that reason, you see in Germany, it's kind of like this polka dot pattern, especially here in the east, because um, the municipalities are kind of like a random grid, and sometimes one of them happens to hit a large town and other times it doesn't. So the point here being that when you look at this type of map, again, it's clearly two separate data sources, and when you make comparisons, you have to be careful. That being said, there definitely is something to say about the difference between Germany versus France in terms of urbanization, centralization of urban networks. In Germany, it's much less centralized. And part of the reason for that is because Germany has not really existed for that long as a single country and more importantly, as a single economy. And so, and as we know, Germany only was created in the late 19th century into a single country, whereas France has existed in one form or another for at least 1,000 years. So France has had much more time to evolve, a centralized sort of urban structure centered obviously around Paris, which is by far the largest city and metro area in France. Whereas in Germany, Berlin is technically the largest city, but it's not the largest metro area. The largest metro area is this sort of Rhine-Ruhr conurbation here in Cologne, Essen, Dortmund, all those places. And yeah, so really it's just a matter of history. It's a matter of politics. And it becomes very clear when you look at this map, even taking into account the sort of potential methodological problems. So, okay, wait a minute. Another thing to look at here is that okay, wait a minute. I almost didn't notice this, but this is actually very important. Let's see if we can just open the raw image. Okay, so this is actually two maps basically photoshopped together. And it's very hard to read here. 25, 50, 100, right? Per, I'm guessing, square kilometer? 25, 50, 100. Okay, so it does look like the color scale was matched up. It's very hard to tell. Yeah, it does look like it matches 300, 600, 1200. So, and the colors seem to have been, I guess, normalized to be the same. So somebody put a lot of effort into photoshopping this together, but obviously what you could have done is just downloaded both data sets, gone into QGIS, plotted both shapefiles with the same color scale, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, that's something that could have been a problem, but it looks like whoever made this worked hard to avoid this problem. Since we've opened up the comments, we might as well take a look at what it says. I'm surprised at how barren Northeast Germany is. I mean, barren is not the right word, right? Because you look at these parts of France are not barren. It's just agriculture, mostly agriculture, some forest, some livestock land, but definitely not barren by any stretch of the imagination. Nor is it, wilderness. I mean, this area is all enclosed. It's all like, private ownership. You can't just like roam freely in these parts of France, or pretty much really anywhere in France for that matter. So, just because there's a low population density doesn't mean that something is, it's like a empty area or whatever. Let's see. France's population was largely stagnant throughout the 19th century. It's a mystery of historical demography why it so underperformed its peers, but presumably industrialization helped Germany. That's interesting. Agrarian predisposition to wheat meant it had a lower carrying capacity. It is true that wheat is not a very sort of energy-dense crop versus the more calorie-packed potato. Yeah, there's a lot going on here. I mean, I just don't know enough information about this, the demographic history of France to really be able to say much, but that's certainly very interesting. Germany could sure use some more living room. That's funny. Or not funny, depending on your sense of humor. Oh, interesting. So what is the red light, green light called in different countries? This, of course, being a reference to Squid the Game, the popular TV show. I don't know. I've never heard of peep behind the curtain. I mean, I guess I'm not from the UK, but in America, it's definitely called red light, green light. Reading the newspaper, interesting. I mean, some of these are really random. Some of these are just, if I remember correctly, in the actual Squid Game show, this doll says like a little rhyme in Korean, and I forget exactly what it means, but it translates to something like some kind of flower is blooming or something. And then when she finishes the verse, she turns around. So it's just kind of a random phrase that you say that has a rhythm. And so you're supposed to like guess, like the players running behind the girl would guess the rhythm and try to predict when she's going to turn around. So that's why like in some of these countries, it's just so random. I don't understand what the color scale. Oh, I see. So all the green countries are 1, 2, 3. I've never heard of this Russian game. I'm not even sure what the phrase would be in Russian. Huh. Average internet speed, fixed internet speed. Okay, so fixed is an important thing because the first thing that we see is like Romania and Hungary are really good. Interestingly, France and Spain are really good. The UK kind of sucks. Russia is okay. Ukraine. I mean, it really depends. Like in Moscow, the internet speeds are fantastic. Like they're way better than anything I've seen in most of the US. America recently started getting faster internet, I think after sort of like the push for gigabit. But before that, Russia definitely had faster internet if you could afford it. That's the key point. So like, dollar for dollar, Russia had faster internet than America, but people in Russia didn't have a lot of money, or I guess still don't relative to the US. So, it's all kind of relative to what people are able to actually afford. But Romania is interesting. I mean, in general, Eastern Europe has... I'm surprised that a lot of these countries don't have faster speeds than Western Europe because, for the most part, their network infrastructure was built after the Western infrastructure, which meant that they got to build it much better, basically. It's sort of like a bit of a paradox, but if you're a late adopter of a technology, you end up actually adopting a better version of it. For example, why New York City doesn't have alleyways, right? So people have to leave their garbage out in the streets, and it's pretty disgusting. If you've ever been to New York, there's just trash everywhere, and it's a horrible flaw of New York City's urban design. But Chicago, which was built after New York City, learned from a lot of New York City's mistakes, and lo and behold, Chicago has lots of alleyways where you can put your dumpster, your garbage. You can park your truck or whatever you're doing, park your car. So it's much better from that perspective. So same thing goes with internet, and that explains why these countries, especially Romania, which is very popular, these countries have often better speeds than a lot of Western countries, especially the UK, which was pretty much the first country in Europe to have internet. Certainly the first country in Europe to sort of widely adopt the internet. I know, Netherlands and other countries were also sort of first on the list, but the internet really started with the US and the UK. And so it's both a blessing and a curse because you end up stuck with a bunch of old shitty infrastructure. But that being said, I also wonder about sampling bias. Maybe speed test is popular in some countries, but not as popular in other countries. And so, maybe that sort of kind of, messes up the sampling a little bit. I mean, honestly, let's just take a look and see. Okay, so this person has shitty internet in Greece. Romania. Let's see, Monaco. No. Yeah, the numbers are too high because the data is biased towards users who actually use speed test. Oh, and yeah, this is what I was gonna say in the very beginning is that this is fixed broadband. So I'm guessing this is like, at your computer, your laptop or your desktop, your Wi-Fi inside your home. So in a lot of countries, especially in my personal experience, Russia, Ukraine, people use mobile internet much, much more for everyday things. Even if they're inside their house, they might be using mobile internet. The reason for this is because in Russia, you can get unlimited mobile data at 100 megabits per second for like $10 a month, you know? And so, yeah, so oftentimes it doesn't even make sense to have Wi-Fi because the cell phone data is cheap enough. And so I'm guessing that that's the case in a lot of countries that might have slower fixed broadband. There's just less incentive for people to really build that up because the mobile infrastructure is already so good. And this works particularly well in countries like Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, former Soviet countries, because these countries are extremely highly urbanized. So most people are going to live in high-rise buildings. They're going to spend most of their time in extremely dense urban areas. So you only really have to put up a few cell towers to capture the vast majority of the population. This is different from a country like the UK, Germany, or especially countries like the United States, where people tend to live in suburbs, things are more spread out. People might live in small towns, medium-sized towns. And so in order to get a great cell coverage for, let's say, 95% of the population, you'd have to put up many, many, many more cell towers. So that's sort of a reason, there's lots of potential reasons why countries might be red or green on this map that are not related to, the actual person's experience using the internet. So when you see a map like this, again, think critically and don't automatically equate this to meaning, that means that in Ukraine, people have really slow internet. That may be true, but it might also be possible that in Ukraine, people prefer to use mobile data, which is faster than fixed. But honestly, looking at all these numbers, 76 megabits per second is still pretty fast. I feel like the standard these days is a couple hundred. If you're really trying to be productive, you're trying to be a gamer, you're trying to get low latency and stuff. But 50, 60, 70, 100, these are plenty fast numbers. So I'm guessing that, yeah, whoever said that these numbers are inflated is probably correct. Let's see. Any more interesting insights here? Yeah, this is, I'd like to see median rather than average. That's true. This map is skewed upwards by the fact that all the Kyles out there are testing their 1,000 megabit connections and the grandmas aren't testing their 10 megabit. And that's really true. Yeah, see, there you go. So somebody from Belarus saying that they have, everything's fiber, but they have 100, 200 megabit plans. They're just too expensive for most people. Interesting. So yeah, anyway, there is a lot to sort of assess here, and it's all very, very complicated, as is typically the reality with these type of maps. So this is a map of European languages by grammatical gender treatment. I actually think I saw this on Twitter this week, even though I try to avoid Twitter nowadays. But yeah, so no grammatical gender. So this is obviously referring to not to personal pronouns, because in English we have, he, she for personal pronouns, but for everyday objects we don't have gender in English. Yeah, interestingly, so You know, all these, the divide is very interesting. It's not quite, I mean, the Romance languages have masculine, feminine, they don't seem to have neuter. The Germanic and Slavic languages do have a neuter gender, but uh, I don't know too much about this, and I'm trying to remember things that I've read on the internet, things that I've read on Wikipedia, but my understanding is that, especially the Scandinavian languages, they're currently undergoing a shift. Well, I don't know. You would have to, you know, go on Wikipedia and read about this on your own. But um, in a lot of these languages, you know, as time goes on, people sort of care less and less about being exactly grammatically precise. And so I believe in Danish and Swedish, the people just kind of gradually combined or kind of stopped using certain, you know, genders, I guess, for objects. Same thing with Dutch. Um, I was reading actually on Twitter about, because somebody was complaining that the Flanders was different from the Netherlands, even though Flemish is not really a separate language. It's, I would say most people, again, that I've heard would consider it to be a dialect of Dutch rather than a separate language. But apparently, for reasons too complicated for people to explain in a single tweet, apparently in Flanders, people seem to be, especially kind of in informal speech, they seem to be a little bit more aware of the genders of certain words, and so they do use genders slightly more often than people in the Netherlands. But it's not. Again, this is not what I'm saying. This is what other people are saying. They're saying it's not totally accurate to put it as a separate color from the Netherlands, but it is true that there is some difference between Flemish, Dutch as spoken in Flanders, and Dutch as spoken in the Netherlands. This is a detailed map of Osaka from the 1920s, so I think we're going to have to open this up, and we're going to have to really look at the picture. Wow, this is very cool. Oh man, this is almost like too big for me to really keep track of. Oh, it's isometric, so the perspective is kind of weird because the buildings here in the foreground are the same size as the buildings in the background. It's a little disorienting, but why doesn't the zoom make any sense? I just wanted to zoom into like this area. Well, anyway, I've never been to Osaka, or Osaka, as some people prefer to say it, but and so I don't like have like a really good understanding really of the city. So this map doesn't mean a whole lot to me personally, but I have to acknowledge, you know, the craftsmanship and just the aesthetic beauty that went into creating this. I don't know. Yeah, there's sort of some miscellaneous facts about the city of Osaka here, but I'm just gonna move on. I will say though, this is a very nice map that I would love to like just print out on a large poster size and just kind of just sort of browse it, you know, just look at it for fun. Which states do you consider part of the Midwest? Oh man. Yeah, it's always kind of a weird, you know, it's sort of very context dependent. You know, Pittsburgh feels sort of well, like I don't know, Ohio and Minnesota to me personally feel very different. Ohio and Wisconsin feel different. Um, but and you know, not to mention like the Great Plains states of North Dakota, Montana. A lot of people that I talk to, they really consider even the Dakotas and Nebraska and Kansas and Oklahoma to sort of just be a separate region of the U.S. altogether. Um, but you know, that being said, you know, obviously Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa. What would I consider the Midwest? I mean, I suppose I did spend 4 years of my life in Chicago. Um, yeah, I mean, I would say Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri. I'm not even totally sure that I would consider Missouri to be part of the Midwest. Like, it's very hard for me to justify that mentally. Um, I mean, I haven't spent a whole lot of time in Missouri, but it really feels actually more Southern, in my opinion, than Midwestern. And you know, I grew up in Northern Virginia, which culturally is not very Southern at all, but it is geographically in the Southern United States technically. since it's in Virginia, and it's part of the same climate belt as much of Missouri. And honestly, if you put me down in a random location in central Missouri, I would not be able to tell you that I'm not currently in Virginia. But it's very different, I think, from places that I've been in: Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, all those states. It's quite different from that. So I'm not even sure if I would include Missouri, to be totally honest with you. Because yeah, so culturally, it doesn't seem very Midwestern to me. By climate, it's or kind of vegetation climate, I don't think it really fits very well. So I would limit it just to these core states right here, basically the Great Lakes states plus Iowa. So anyway, it's interesting. Yeah, it's we don't have set definitions for regions. Things are very flexible, and some people do consider. I guess, at least Western Pennsylvania, I would say, is much closer in character to Ohio than it is to, I don't know, just than it is to even the eastern half of the state. So, whatever. It's a nice little map, cool survey. I support this. Oh man, this is interesting. Countries with a higher GDP per capita than South Korea, 1970 versus 2016. So honestly, these maps are all well and good, but this is just like another way of saying, here's another way of getting the point across. Here, watch this. Yeah, so there you go. 2010, I guess they kind of stopped after 2010. I mean, does it keep going up? It kind of does. It slows down a tiny bit, but not by much. Where was I? Anyway, so in 1970, South Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world. It had lower GDP per capita than many African countries. And a lot of people, especially in this area, in Northern Virginia, there's a lot of Korean immigrants who came in the 80s, came in the 90s, because even as late as the 90s, Korea was still sort of a middle income economy. It was a place where there was opportunity, but it was also very easy to move to the United States. And if you had a good education, you could, make a lot more money for yourself. So, versus, 2016, South Korea is, wealthier than pretty much all the countries except for, Western Europe, Australia, Japan, US, Canada. And I think actually, as of like 2020, the GDP per capita in South Korea probably exceeds even a lot of the countries that you see in blue here. So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, Korea definitely went from, and so the question is if South Korea was able to go from one of the poorest countries on earth to one of the richest countries on earth, pretty much in the span of 2 generations. Then sort of how come other countries can't do it? How come African countries seem to be stuck? Parts of India, Latin American countries. Does this point out sort of some sort of cultural difference? Or was there really like policy differences, some things that the South Korean government did differently from other countries that led to huge economic success? Obviously, the truth is, a combination of all of these answers, we also have to look at the flip side. I mean, South Korea certainly is doing very well as a country. If you look at, human development, how much money people have, and things like that. But would I want to live in South Korea? I don't think so. Would I want to raise my family in Korea? Would I want to become a South Korean? I really can't say that that's what I would want. And the reason for that is just because if you look at the things that really matter, things like life satisfaction, the suicide rate in South Korea is extremely high. And again, that might be for cultural reasons. It might be, I don't know about Korea. I shouldn't really speak about Korea, but I know in Japan, for example, for a long time, suicide was considered sort of an honorable way out And that's different from Western Europe, obviously. So that would lead to higher suicide rates, all else being equal. But in Korea, suicide rates are high. The fertility rate is very low, among the lowest in the world, basically. It's a three-way tie between South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore for lowest fertility. And the latest numbers that I saw for Korea were, I think, 0.85 or something children per woman. And that's the cost of extreme productivity. South Korea is extremely productive, very high GDP per capita, but this comes at the cost. If you dedicate all your resources, all your sort of national energy to economic productivity, you basically, you just don't have time for kids. Nobody wants to have kids if they're busy with their career and all that stuff. But that's terrible because that means that there's going to be social problems, there's going to be a labor shortage, there's going to be huge inefficiencies related to healthcare. Who's going to take care of all these old people? It's a problem that hasn't quite hit yet, and so I don't think people are as concerned as they should be. Like personally, I'm kind of like a pro natalist, I guess you could say. I think it's important to have a healthy birth rate. So I don't know. We'll see what happens to South Korea, but personally, I feel like all of these sort of East Asian countries that have become tremendously economically successful have pretty much done so essentially at the cost of of families and of children, and of course kids are the future, so essentially they sacrifice their own future for sort of an extremely rapid rise in productivity. And we'll see what happens. Maybe automation is sort of a way out of this situation. Of course, a lot of people would say that they should open up to immigrants. I think, obviously, if they want to, that's fine, but it's really hard for me to imagine there would have to be like a huge cultural shift for Korea and Japan to really open up to immigrants. I mean, that's a whole other topic, and a topic that I really don't know too much about, but I think immigration probably will not be the solution for these countries anytime soon. So we'll see what happens. But it's definitely an interesting phenomenon to see a country like South Korea just go from 0 to 1, in a matter of 30, 40, or 50 years, basically. Oh, okay, so this one's an animation showing the linguistic evolution of the British Isles. Yeah, and this is very cool. It's just a bunch of groups. Okay, so let's just look at it. 1600, Welsh is still around, Gaelic is still around, but falling. At 2000, pretty much English dominates. It's just, invaders coming in, and let's see, Old English, Middle English. The influence of Norman French is sort of, I guess, not really shown here. Probably because it didn't result in like a totally different language. It just resulted in a bunch of loan words and things like that. But that was also a huge influence on English. Interesting. I think this animation moves a little bit too fast for me personally. I would like to sort of see each individual frame a little bit more. But yeah, it's a cool animation. And it's an interesting story, when it comes to just the story of the United Kingdom and the British Isles. To what extent can this be considered sort of colonization and even, I hate to say it, but cultural genocide is a word that's used oftentimes these days, and people don't seem to use it in the context of Europe all that much, but it's true. I mean, Gaelic culture has pretty much been if not annihilated, certainly driven to the absolute margins of the British Isles by English culture. And that's in some sense that's also kind of okay. I don't think people are too upset about it for the most part. And languages and cultures change over time inevitably. So it is what it is, kind of. But certainly, man, Irish. It's tough. It's like how in Belarus the national language is Belarusian or Belarusian, as I typically say. Um, but in fact, the Russian language is much more commonly used, especially um, in education, business, science, things like that. I don't. People hardly use Belarusian, if I'm not mistaken. And it's like Ireland is an even more extreme case of that, where and actually Belarusian and Russian are very similar languages, whereas Irish and English are completely different languages, not even in the same language group. English being a Germanic language and Irish being a Celtic language. Um, and so the national language of Ireland is Irish, but most people, speak English all the time. Some people know some Irish, but yeah, I don't know. We'll see what happens. It's really going to take a lot, I think, to genuinely revive the Irish language in Ireland. Um, and it's kind of like for what? It's good to know English because you can plug right into the world economy. It's a huge advantage if you grow up speaking English. Why would you, choose to grow up speaking Irish if you could speak English? But I know I shouldn't say that because I know that people value their culture, they value their identity. The reason that I speak Russian, for example, having grown up in the United States, is because it's very important for my family, and I understand that Irish is very important for Irish people. So, if anything, I'm rooting for the Irish people. I want to see Irish come back, but I don't know. It seems like a long shot at this point. Maybe some Irish people can chime in and tell us about the state of the Irish language as of 2021. Counties that voted twice for Obama and then for Trump. Interesting. Well, it's kind of like, I don't know, it's just basically, I don't know, just it looks like mostly white areas. I don't know really what to say about it. I don't know. I hate politics. I hate talking about Obama and Trump and stuff. I mean, okay, this is actually a series. So, okay, I guess it's showing them kind of zoomed in. So this county here, shoot, I forget what it's called, but it contains, it's mostly just like Key West, I guess. So interestingly, they voted for Trump. Maybe that's the Cubans. I don't know. Yeah, it's really hard to say much. I don't know too much about the specifics of any of these counties. I mean, okay, I know about I think it's Suffolk and I don't know whatever those two counties are in Long Island. Um, just kind of New York Republicans, sort of Hamptons people. I don't know. It's really hard to say anything about this, and I'm just gonna move on. Um, I'm also running out of steam here, and I'm also kind of damaging my throat talking a lot, so I'm going to have to wrap it up soon, but we can do a couple more maps. Okay, so Nazi propaganda map. I guess it's showing all the ethnically German areas. So it's showing Alsace, it's showing Schleswig, which is currently in Denmark. It's got all the areas that are now in Poland. Sudetenland, Austria is of course shown as part of Germany, and I don't know. I guess this must have been after the Anschluss. Let's just click on it and see what it says here. I don't really know German well at all, but I might be able to try to translate some of this legend here. So German, Switzerland, Luxembourg. Okay, so it's not really making a description. It's just like saying this is Luxembourg, this is Switzerland, and it's implied that people understand sort of what this is. Yeah, South Tyrol. I mean, it's a propaganda map, and obviously, it's very well done. Because the color scheme very clearly shows you kind of, what you want to see, which is the fact that this is the German land, and these other territories outside of Germany are also associated with Germany. So it's very effective, I think, in that sense. It's also, I mean, it really shows how much, so all of this land in Poland used to be, you know, German for hundreds of years, until I believe it was like Stalin, Churchill, and the Polish guy made a deal where Poland, the Soviet Union wanted more land, so they took part of Poland, and then to prevent Poland from getting too upset, they just moved Poland west. Um, so, you know, these cities like Breslau, which is Wrocław now, if I'm not mistaken, and Katowice, and Plzeň, or no, that's Pilsen. What are we talking about here? Szczecin. I don't know if I should say the Polish name or the German name, right? But the point is, all these cities were always German cities historically. They never had Polish people living in them. Maybe very small minorities before the war, and then they were just kind of vacated, right? And Polish people moved in. So I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. I'm just saying it's very interesting. I don't think there's any other case in history, actually, of that happening, where basically people were, like, the native population was, you know, systematically deported. And of course, when I say native population, I don't, you know, native urbanized population with the same technological capacity, right? Not, you know, not white people versus the Native Americans, but two European countries where they just got rid of the Germans and just had Polish people move in. Very, very interesting. And actually, and you know, this had a huge effect on Polish society, Polish culture, Polish language. This part of Poland, the present-day Poland, which used to be German, essentially consists of a mix of immigrants from various parts of Old Poland. And so the Polish dialect in this area actually has a mixture of features from various Eastern Polish dialects. There's also, what is it? And then, of course, in the Polish elections, these people vote very differently. They tend to vote for sort of the more... See, I don't know what terms are appropriate in the context of Polish politics. I don't know if I want to say left-wing, less traditional political parties. Those are the parties that are more popular in this western part of Poland, which was sort of settled relatively recently in this unusual manner, historically speaking. Yeah, so this is an interesting map that raises a lot of questions and just brings up so many different things that happened. Obviously, all these German minorities were expelled subsequently. The Swiss Germans are still around. The Austrians are still around, although they don't... I don't know, actually. This is a question. If any Austrian people are watching, do you consider yourself German? Probably not, right? But, I mean... Yeah, I don't know. It reminds me a lot of Russia and Ukraine, actually, because the Austrian dialect is sufficiently different from German that, especially in, like, if you go into, like, the real mountain valleys or whatever, people, you know, somebody from Berlin or Hamburg could not understand, like, most of what, you know, a real, like, Austrian person is saying if they're really speaking, like, their colloquial dialect. And it's, you know, very similar with the Ukrainian language. If a Russian speaker listens to Ukrainian, unless they really pay attention or really focus, it's very hard to really understand much of anything. Or, you know, unless you have previous exposure to Ukrainian, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is that I think it's actually an analogous situation, and I hope I don't get into any trouble for saying this. And you know, I say this with the utmost humility. Please correct me. Please comment. You know, I'd love to have these discussions. But yeah, I would draw that parallel because so meanwhile in Austria, from what I understand, and this may be changing, but in sort of official television, in news media, I think I read this about Switzerland too. Standard German is used. And maybe Standard German with like a slight Austrian accent or some regional particularities, but for the most part, Standard German is used in sort of official settings. And that's how it was in Ukraine as well for a long time. Standard Russian was used as opposed to Ukrainian in settings like school and government and science and industry. Of course, nowadays this is changing. I don't know. I've heard different things from different people, but Russian is still definitely widely used, especially in sort of a scientific or business context in Ukraine. But you know, they're definitely making a big push, a big effort to try to switch over to the Ukrainian language. So imagine that. Imagine if you know, Austrian German was codified as a separate language, and then you know, imagine it just, it's so fascinating for me to try to sort of map the Ukrainian culture war debate onto a situation like Germany versus Austria. So I don't know. I think I'll stop there, but it's a very interesting topic. And actually, I've just hit 1 hour, so I'm gonna wrap it up. Yeah, okay, no, I'm not even gonna look at this map. This is this is another propaganda map. Funny enough, I I support mothers, I support paid leave, but let's face it, this is a propaganda map. You know, singling out basically the U.S. and Suriname and Papua New Guinea. Yeah, I wonder how many people work in offices in Papua New Guinea. You know, for big corporations. Anyway, that's for another time. So this has been another hour of the MapPorn weekly review. I hope this is enjoyable. I think I'm just gonna do this every week. I may or may not change the format. So we're just gonna keep going and we're just gonna keep rolling. So stay tuned for next week.